So today I'll be reading through the worksheet, the Mongol Empire and the Conquest of Genghis Khan. Okay, we're going to look through some of the questions that we're going to have to be looking for. We have a first one here is, how did Genghis Khan unite the Mongols? What was Yasa and what did it enforce? How far did the Mongol Empire reach? Okay, revisit these questions in just a moment. We'll do some reading and then we'll see if we have any of those answers in there. 4. How did Genghis Khan out the Mongols? What was Yasa and what did it enforce? And how far did the Mongols Empire reach? Okay, the Mongols were nomadic warriors from Central Asian steppe. Living in large family groups, these warriors were united by chief Temujin, who would later be called Genghis Khan. In 1215, Genghis Khan began his conquest by seizing Zhongdu and a large part of China. By the time of his death in 1227, he ruled Asia from Korea to the Caspian Sea. His successors continued to push the frontiers of the empire as far south as Vietnam and the Persian Gulf, and as far west as Hungary and Poland. Mongolia in the 11th century was occupied by 5 tribal confederations, and each contained many smaller tribes. Temujin understood that if he is to gain power and create an empire, he must command the loyalty of all these tribes. These tribes often waged wars on each other, and Temujin saw this as an opportunity, a weakness he would then exploit for his own gain by making decisive alliances with his relative and family clans, and slowly eliminated the rival chieftains, until all the remaining Mongol aristocrats accepted his dominion. He crowned himself as the Genghis Khan, which means the great ruler. Genghis Khan was a strong leader. He was cruel and murderous to his enemies, but loyal to those who followed him. He promoted the soldiers who performed regardless of their background. He even expected his own sons to perform if they wanted to be leaders. Genghis introduced a code of law to the empire, Yasa, and it forbade the selling of women, theft and bribery, hunting animals during the breeding season, and fighting among Mongol tribes. Also, the Mongols selected officials based on their merits, performance, and loyalty. Because of this, most of the officials in the empire were in fact not Mongols. Religious and cultural freedom was also granted to the subjects of the empire as well, and the Mongol Empire became one of the most multicultural empires in history. The empire had a relatively effective system of record keeping, and the official in charge of this was called Jargachi. Genghis Khan also encouraged literacy. Many public schools were started to provide education for children. After uniting the Mongol tribes, Genghis turned to the rich lands of the south. He first attacked the Zizai people in 1207. It only took him 2 years to conquer the Zizai and get them to surrender. In 1211, Genghis turned to the Jin dynasty of China. He wanted to exact revenge over these people for their treatment of the Mongols. By 1215, he had captured Yanjing, the capital city of the Jin, and the Mongols ruled over the northern part of China. Genghis wanted to establish trade with the Muslim lands to the west. He sent a trade delegation there to meet with their leaders. However, the governor of one of their cities had the men of the delegation killed. Genghis was furious. He took up the command of 200,000 warriors and spent the next several years destroying the cities to the west. He went as far as Eastern Europe, destroying everything along the way. He was merciless, leaving no one alive. All right, so you should have some notes in, some highlights at least, and hopefully some notes of how Genghis Khan united the Mongols, and you can fill in some of that here now. What was Yasa? We went over that briefly. I should fill in that as well. And how far did the Mongol Empire reach? That was in a couple of different places where it spoke about that. So you can take some time and fill in those spots there. Okay, the next set of questions. Establish dynasty. How was race utilized in the Yuan dynasty? What were the Yuan dynasty's views on religion? Okay, choose 3 aspects of the Yuan dynasty's rule that helped establish and maintain the dynasty, and describe how each aspect helped establish or maintain the dynasty. So we're looking for 3 aspects of the Yuan dynasty's rule that helped establish and maintain that dynasty. How did they maintain themselves, and how did they get that established? Number 5, how did the Yuan dynasty influence the Silk Road? These are 2 examples of this, and they are related. So 2 related examples. Who was Marco Polo? What was Marco Polo impressed by on his travels to the Far East? Okay, we'll come to that in just a moment. Right, Kublai Khan and his conquest of China. Kublai Khan was a grandson of the first great Mongol emperor Genghis Khan. His father was Tulia, the youngest of Genghis Khan's favorite 4 sons. Growing up, Kublai traveled with his family while his grandfather Genghis conquered China and the Muslim nations to the west. He learned to ride horses and shoot a bow and arrow. He lived in a round tent called a yurt. As the grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai was given a small area of northern China to rule. Kublai was very interested in the culture of the Chinese. He studied the philosophies of ancient China, such as Confucianism and Buddhism. When Kublai was in his 30s, his older brother, Mongke, became the Khan of the Mongol Empire. Mongke promoted Kublai to the ruler of northern China. Kublai did a good job managing a large territory, and a few years later, his brother asked him to attack and conquer southern China and the Song dynasty. While leading his army against the Song, Kublai found out that his brother Mongke had died. Kublai agreed to a peace treaty with the Song, where the Song would pay him tribute each year and then return back north. Kublai eventually conquered much of China and established his own Chinese dynasty called the Yuan dynasty. In 1271, Kublai declared that of the Yuan dynasty of China, crowning himself as the first Yuan emperor. It still took 5 more years to completely conquer the Song dynasty of the south, but by 1276, Kublai had united all of China under one rule. In order to run the large empire, Kublai combined many aspects of Mongol and Chinese administration. He also incorporated Chinese leaders to the government. The Mongols were good at fighting wars, but he knew they could learn a lot about running a large government from the Chinese. Kublai encouraged trade and communications with lands beyond China. He brought in people from all around the world. One of his famous visitors was Marco Polo from Europe. Kublai also permitted freedom of religion, including Confucianism, Islam, and Buddhism. Despite having diversity, Kublai instituted social classes based on race in order to keep control of the Chinese subjects. The Mongols made up the highest class and were always given preference over other races. Below the Mongols were the non-Chinese races, such as Muslims and Turks. At the bottom were the Chinese, with the people of the southern Song considered the lowest class. The downfall of the Yuan. The Yuan dynasty was the shortest lived of all major Chinese dynasties. After Kublai Khan's death, the dynasty began to weaken. The heirs of Kublai began to fight over power, and the government became corrupt. Chinese rebel groups began to form to fight against the Mongol rule. In 1368, a Buddhist monk named Zhu Yinzheng led the rebels to overthrow the Yuan. He then established the Ming dynasty. The Silk Road was a trade route that went from China to Eastern Europe. It went along the northern borders of China, India, and Persia, and ended up in Eastern Europe, near today's Turkey and the Mediterranean Sea. The Silk Road was important because it helped to generate trade and commerce between a number of different kingdoms and empires. This helped for ideas, culture, inventions, and unique products to spread across much of the settled world. Under the rule of the Yuan dynasty, set up by Kublai Khan of the Mongols, trade from China along the Silk Road would reach its peak. During this time, Mongols controlled a significant portion of the trade route, enabling Chinese merchants to travel safely. Also, merchants were granted more social status during the Mongol rule. Marco Polo was a merchant and explorer who traveled throughout the Far East and China for much of his life.